The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3911. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 3911, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating state government, the second engrossment.
To the author of the bill, the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's another great day to plant trees, and this is the Environment and Natural Resources Supplemental Finance and Policy Bill. The budget target for the general fund was $17 million increase. The bill also makes various appropriations in dedicated accounts. It builds on last year's historic investments in the environment, protecting our environment and our natural resources. It supplements those investments and helps rebalance some of those investments. Before I start, I want to make sure I thank our committee staff, Janelle Taylor and Bob Eliff from House Research, Fiscal Analyst Brad Hagemeyer, Reviser Cindy Maxwell, Committee Administrator Peter Strohmeyer, and Committee Legislative Assistant Sam O'Neill, partisan researchers Chelsea Ray and Amy Zipko. We would not be able to do this without your help and dedicated work for the people of Minnesota. As I mentioned, this bill supplements last year. One of the areas where we had proposed a large investment in last year's bill was in trees. And planting a tree is one of the most important things we can do to protect our environment. This bill appropriates over $19 million for trees. It also protects air quality. Prevention is better than cleanup. Prevention is better than cleanup. This bill provides stronger protections for residents of environmental justice areas. It creates an air pollution prioritization and compliance protocols in the 7-county metro area and provides increased enforcement and penalties for repeat offenders. Solid waste is a big problem in our state, and this bill addresses our solid waste problem. It takes major steps to address that with extended producer responsibility, or EPR. Packaging waste and printed paper now account for roughly 40% of our garbage. Just south of me in Dakota County, what used to be a landfill is now a mountain. Our garbage is literally growing, and we can see it in front of us. Other highlights: we protect pollinators, provides over $1 million for nation-leading popular lawns to legumes program, and it designates the rusty patch bumblebee as an endangered species in Minnesota. It protects the dedicated accounts for landfill cleanup, notifying those counties where the landfills are if there are future raids. It provides additional protection for our waters. Looking at the issue of nitrates, we take action with our state properties. We require the DNR to monitor water quality at our various state fish hatcheries and clarifies DNR's rulemaking authority around shorelands. If you listen to nothing else, one part of this bill is a reason enough to vote for it, and that is helium. We currently do not have any regulations set up in our state for the extraction of helium. That means that people can, and companies can come in and take the helium without any consequence, without any regulation. We have to have some support, something to protect the resource, the people of Minnesota. And in this bill, we have that framework. We provide a moratorium on extraction while we work out those details and involve a public process to protect Minnesota's resources for helium and other gases. And then finally, this is a bipartisan bill. We have at least 3 provisions in here from the GOP. We have thank you, Madam Speaker. We promote small businesses by allowing the sale of bear fat products from Representative Nathan Nelson. We extend a provision to help clean up French Lake and Rice County from Representative Daniels. And we have a report on reopening the General C.C. Andrews State Nursery by Representative Dotseth. And that, Madam Chair, I will take questions.
There are amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hanson R. moves to amend House Bill number 3911, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A14.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Hanson, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is the A14 amendment. What it does is it brings us into the same type of structure as we had with cumulative impacts last year with the air quality monitoring and protection. It limits that to the 7-county metropolitan area. In addition, it updates the community tree planting environmental justice definitions so they more closely align to what we had passed last year. And then it also updates that with census tract information. So it takes out a provision relating to ATVs on signage, and that is the A14 amendment. I'd ask for your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Nash, are you standing to be recognized, or are you just hanging out? Okay. There being no discussion on the amendment, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Davis moves to amend House Bill number 3911, the second engrossment, as amended. The amendment is coded A20.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Fillmore, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the author of this bill, Representative Hanson. So this amendment it's going to give our law enforcement all across the state, our sheriffs, it's going to give them a win at a time that they really need a win. So currently, when our sheriffs, our brave sheriff's departments go out and do a search and rescue, someone goes out on a lake, they need to get saved. Right now in statute, they can get a partial reimbursement for going out and doing that. And the reason for that is many times, like in my county I live in, Crow Wing County, we've got a lot of lakes. And we get a lot of people coming from all over the state or even out of the state, not necessarily from Crow Wing County, and they find themselves in these situations where they need a rescue. And so it would make sense that the state would give them a partial reimbursement for being brave and doing their job. And so that happens until the water freezes, folks. When the water freezes and our sheriff's departments have to do a search and rescue, when the conditions are even more dangerous, we then don't reimburse them as a state. This amendment is going to fix that. It's going to line it up with the water rescues. I'll read a portion of this here. It says, a county sheriff may be reimbursed for all costs that are over and above the county sheriff's regular operating budget and that are incurred from search and rescue operations due to recreational activities on unsafe ice. So please vote green, members. Let's help out our sheriffs.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would support the amendment.
Further discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Heinzman moves to amend House Bill number 3911, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, and that is my amendment. I am hoping that we have an opportunity to move this amendment forward. I'll just quickly mention that even though I'm in a tree industry, that I'm very proud to point out that I have planted many thousands of trees personally. I love to work on legislation. I appreciate the legislation and the spirit of what we're doing in this bill. Anytime we could have more trees, that's great. My concern and the reason I am putting this amendment forward is that I want to specifically address the earmarks. So this amendment deletes the earmarks in the new community tree planting grant program. Absent that, I feel like we'd have a really good final product, and that's why I have brought the amendment forward today.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask that you oppose the amendment. The amount of money going to Northfield. Northfield actually straddles 2 counties, and so it wouldn't. This is a particular grant that is going out through the Metropolitan Council. In addition, in previous grants through the DNR, there was extra points for communities that were under 20,000 people, and Northfield's population is 20,500. So that is why we put that in there with the city of St. Peter. St. Peter, if you may remember, about 25 years ago had a tornado. A lot of trees went down with that. They were replanted with ash trees. And so the needs in St. Peter are somewhat unique. And so that's why we have those particular earmarks. I would ask for a no vote on the Heinzman amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say nay.
Madam Chair.
The motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Jacob moved to amend House File Number 3911, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A18.
To the author of the amendment, the member from Winona, Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to start by requesting a roll call vote.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Well, thank you. So what my amendment really seeks to do is to retain a many decades old program that, give you a little bit of background, the state has allowed farmers to plant corn and other crops on state land dating as far back as when the state originally purchased the land. So in my neighborhood, myself, my family, and my neighbors came around the late 1800s. The DNR came in the 1940s and proposed to purchase a lot of farmland and create, in my area, the Whitewater State Park. And in order to get the farmers to sell that property to the state, the farmers didn't want to sell. So the DNR and the state said, well, we'll allow you to continue to farm that property, and in lieu of paying for the land, we'll ask that you leave 1/3 of your crop for the wildlife. So this became a really good program for the farmers, for the hunters, for the DNR, but mostly for the wildlife. So you've got middle of the winter, deer having a very hard time finding food to eat. And how this program works, when you leave 1/3 of your crop, you don't just leave 1/3 in one area. You have to leave 6 rows, then you can take 12 rows, then you leave 6 rows. So this really helps with the wildlife. And by not having this program, the deer will have no place to go other than on private property. So this really, and my farm, 90% surrounded by the DNR, as many of my fellow neighbors are. I've seen herds as large as 70 deer roaming across my field, eating my crops, and for the DNR to not even make an attempt to try to feed their animals. In committee, I asked the author, who's asking for this? Is it the farmers? Is it the hunters? Is it the DNR? And he said, no one's asking for this. He said, this is my idea. So in order for the state, DNR, farmers to all get along, this is a good program. My amendment seeks to eliminate this prohibition on planting corn, and so I encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I know on a Wednesday afternoon, not everybody wants to read a fiscal note, but I would encourage you to look at the fiscal note on House File 3624. That is the bill that Representative Jacobs was referencing. And I want to give a little bit of context in terms of public land versus private land. You know, we have invested, and I'll go back to the bill from last year, we invested $21 million of general taxpayers' money into soil health. $21 million for soil health, for voluntary practices, voluntary conservation practices on private land. Private land, where we try to encourage those voluntary practices. But there is land that we all own, all of us together, that public land. And I think most Minnesotans would be surprised to learn that we have 12,035 cultivated acres of DNR land. Now, we often get accused, or the agencies get accused, legislators get accused of one hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. Now, we have the public trust, the public responsibility for dealing with that public land. And we have heard here for many years the issues related to climate change and the benefits of trees, the benefits of native grasses, the benefits of native vegetation. In addition, we start to see scientific research that shows that maybe food plots weren't a great idea. Maybe they draw wildlife to crops. That old mentality of planting food crops for the livestock, for the wildlife, for the wildlife. Wildlife are not livestock. And so by having diversity, biodiversity on our public lands, that biodiversity actually leads to strength and balance with ecology. Ecology is a word that we don't often use anymore, but it means things going into balance. So the DNR has cooperative farming agreements and agricultural leases. That means they are renting that land out, renting our land out to grow corn. In the last year, we've also heard about nitrates in water. When you're growing corn, you're using fertilizer, you use the fertilizer in certain areas, that timing, rate, and application lead to contamination of groundwater and surface water. So planting native vegetation, planting trees, taking the public land and putting into a public purpose of having those type of plants growing on it leads to diversity in wildlife. It lessens the impact of deer. It lessens the impact of other wildlife. So there are multiple benefits for transitioning these public lands off from corn leases. There are benefits to the public in terms of better water, better biodiversity, better wildlife, and hopefully helping mitigate impacts of climate. Now it's going to cost money because there's going to be lost revenue, and we provide for that. It does cost money in the short run, but in the long run it saves us money. And it saves us an impact relating to habitat and water quality. So I'd ask for a no vote on the Jacob Amendment.
Representative Jacob. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, excellent point raised by my seatmate, Representative Jacob. I've seen firsthand some of the damage that the deer do in fields. And I'll tell you, if a deer has a choice between some dry old grass in the fall or a nice cob of corn standing on a stalk, he's going to go to the corn. Corn is an excellent feed, high in energy. And by the way, corn is a perfect solar panel, taking in CO2 and giving off oxygen. But we heard in Ag Committee last year, soybean farmers saying that their fields, especially in southeast Minnesota, were being, in some areas, decimated by deer. And if we don't do something to curb those losses, we're going to be looking at bills to provide depredation damage to soybean farmers, corn farmers, because these are the state's deer herd and causing significant damage into the thousands of dollars into soybean fields, we heard in committee last year. So I support the Jacobs Amendment. It's common sense. We've done this for years. Sometimes there were agreements made, maybe handshakes, that if I sell you the land, you can keep growing corn on it. But we don't want to go backwards in terms of allowing depredation by our wildlife in Minnesota. So please support the Jacobs Amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment. To the author of the amendment, Representative Jacob.
Would the author of the bill yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Jacob.
So the bill appears to prohibit planting corn. Could those acres be planted to barley, wheat, any other grain, or is that really what is the true intention of the bill? To pull this land out of production entirely, or to take it, prohibit planting corn?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Jacob. It says planting corn. You could plant, as you know, you could put a small grain in and then transition into alfalfa. That transition over time, hopefully, and we put the money in to plant in native grasses and trees.
Representative Jacob.
Will the author of the bill yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Jacob.
So if the land could be planted to something other than corn, why is there $3.1 million in the bill to transfer that land into trees and native grasses?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Jacob. The prohibition is on corn. The preference is on the native grasses and the trees. We want to make sure we have the money to try to encourage that. It is unlikely that that is going to occur over 1 year or even 2. It's a transition.
Representative Jacob.
Okay, well, I'll just remind people, the way the plan stands, good for the farmers, good for hunters, good for the DNR. Most importantly, it feeds our wildlife and keeps the wildlife from being predators on our crops. Please support my amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Speaker. I would too speak in favor of this amendment. And there was quite a conversation in committee about this issue, and I feel like there is some missing context for those watching at home and for members potentially. This issue doesn't just start and end in a timeline that you might think. Like, it is not an emerging discussion or issue. This goes way back. And there were many that have spoken and shared their feelings on this over the years, and we're just, I guess, addressing many of those long conversations and making sure that those agreements are honored in this amendment. Making sure that we continue to remember our promises. And I want to make sure that I spoke and rose to this and asked for a green vote on the Jacob Amendment.
Further discussion. Representative Lawrence.
Madam Chair, thank you. Day 15. I want to speak in favor of this amendment as well. I have the privilege of having the Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge partly in my district as well. And I watch as they have used numerous different management techniques in all different parts of that National Wildlife Refuge. Once again, I look at this as being something that's micromanaging. We've had discussion about education over the last few days, about micromanaging our school boards and our principals and our superintendents. I believe this is a far-reaching STEM as well. We've got DNR personnel that have been hired to manage those areas. And as I've watched over the years, our refuge is beautiful. It's gone through numerous transitions, and its type of managements have changed many, many different times over the years. And so as I speak in favor of this amendment, because we practice, we talk about practicing, or emphasizing best method practices. Practice. There we go. Thank you. I defer. But best management practices. And we need to take into all considerations what are those best management practices. And so I speak in favor of this amendment. It's a good thing. There's a lot of factors that come from it. And the biggest part is it leaves the options open for the different areas of our state, the different properties that are public property that are state owned, and for our DNR officials to use what's best for the area and more specifically for the specific spot that they're managing. And so please vote in favor of the amendment.
Further discussion to the A18 amendment? Seeing none, Representative Johnson.
I too rise in favor of this amendment. This is an important amendment. Not only is an agreement made when the land was purchased, and some of it was purchased under duress from the ag industry and the farmers in those communities. In my years as deputy sheriff, I'd drive around, I'd see the state land with the corn on it, see it with the beans on it. And the wildlife, not only the deer, but it was the turkeys and all sorts of other animals would come to those. In the spring, when the ducks and geese were migrating north, they'd be stopping at those fields to eat. It was good for all wildlife. But I've also seen the land, because I actually have part of Cedar Creek and the university in my area, where they didn't do the crop rotations and have the crops on the land. You didn't see much for any type of wildlife on that land. They'd walk through, but they wouldn't stay there. This is a program that's good for the wildlife, it's good for the farmers, it's good for DNR. And what's more interesting is DNR did not want this, ag industry did not want this, nobody wanted this. And what was more concerning to me was the response by Representative Hansen that showed that his goal was to end any use of that land for agriculture. Agriculture is a huge industry in this state. DNR and this state has purchased so much land over the last 20 years, it's ridiculous. We have more land than we can manage. And with the farmers using that land, rotating their crops from not just corn, but there's beans, there's alfalfa, there's rye, there's oats. They rotate it. It's better for that land. Members, please vote green on this amendment.
Further discussion to the A18 amendment. The author of the amendment, Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I asked the author if the land could be planted to something else, if it's simply prohibited corn. He said, yes, it could be planted to something else. It could be planted to barley, wheat, whichever. But the language on 73.29 says, the commissioner must transition all existing corn plots into native vegetation. So, and then the author goes on to say that this increases diversity. Seriously, you're going to remove something that's available for the deer to eat? Give the DNR one less tool, give the farmers one less tool, give the hunters one less tool, and that's going to increase diversity? That's less diversity. So please support my amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A18 amendment.
Seven is the number we want to be at. We're there, so let me know. Yep.
The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carol.
Carol, no.
Carol, no. Howard.
Howard, no.
Howard, no. Cagle.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend House Law number 3911, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A16.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this amendment simply removes a swimming pool that is being paid for through the Outdoor Recreational Opportunities for Underserved Communities account. It's just not an appropriate use of that account, and I would request a green vote.
Discussion to the A16 amendment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I understand this is a voice vote. I am going to be opposing it, but members are free to vote as they wish.
Further discussion to the A16 amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. No. The motion prevails and the amendment has been adopted. Seeing no further amendments, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House Law number 3911, as amended.
Third reading, discussion to the bill. The member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill has some good stuff and not so good stuff. That's a typical bill. One of the good things in it is the helium. It's in my district, the people I represent, the area I represent. We have an opportunity to support this, and it's a great part of this bill. It will support, it sets priorities on the regulation of this new gas, something Minnesota does not have anything in the books on. So the DNR, MPCA, we're all working together to find that management so we can do this extraction. So that's a great thing. I can't say enough about how good that is. Helium is an important element for us in our society. Those in here that go to the doctor and get MRIs, helium is part of it. Those that use computers here, it makes chips. Helium helps make a chip. And some of the things that some of the folks who helped support this bill were the MCEA, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and also Friends of the Boundary Waters. Normally, in our part of the world, a nemesis, but we're working together because I think everyone sees when you work together, you get further ahead, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, unfortunately, there's some things in this bill that I have a hard time supporting. The representative, I think it was Representative Kraft, had the boat. I'm trying to find it here. 1 second. The boat wrap product. Fantastic idea. Sitting around one day with a group watching that stuff come off a boat, it's like, where does that go? Yeah, where does it go? And you start adding it up, it's huge. It's definitely an issue. Before we roll it out to the whole state, we talked about this in committee. I would love to see it as a pilot project in the area where the recycling is done. Because if all of northern Minnesota has all of it and we can't recycle it up there, how much energy and how much environmental degradation does it take to move it from there to down here? So I think it's worthy, it's absolutely worthy of looking at what to do. I don't think it's ready for a statewide rollout. Other issues in here that I kind of have some issues with were the feedlots. Those are all good. The corn planting state land, not good. The trapping restrictions. One of the issues with the trapping restrictions, in northern Minnesota, we have a lot of public land, but there's also some private land near the public land. And sometimes the water, ordinary high water mark, you go over private land to get to public land. So there's a lot of questions that come up with this bill. I think it needs to be vetted better. I think it needs a little more work. My goal here is, I hope that we can work some of these issues out in conference. Packaging and Waste Reductions Act. Again, just a great idea, but it went from an idea to something really big right away, and I think it needs some vetting. I think we need to look at that. It kind of fundamentally changes the way we collect waste with the e-waste. Not saying it's not a bad idea, I'm just saying it collects a lot of money and puts it in a different place that we're not sure what exact product is going in there. Other than that, it's, again, for me, it's the helium bill that's really important. Unfortunately, there's enough in here that I can't support it right now. I'm hoping when it comes back from conference committee, it is going to have something in there that I can support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Roseau, Representative Burkle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this bill has numerous provisions that are bad for business and bad for farmers. Thankfully, our outdoor enthusiasts are going to be happy that this ATV language has been fixed. The north of Highway 2 language that Chair Hansen's amendment took out is very much appreciated by the folks back north, especially my hunters and trappers. Also, the ATV account money for the trails, very appreciative of that. There's really no need to change this Highway 2 language. The DNR currently can classify land, forest land is closed, limited, or managed regarding the use of off-highway vehicles. So I was glad to see that provision disappear from the bill. Section 30 of the bill, which addresses the mandatory environmental impacts statements for large livestock projects, very problematic for our livestock industry. Minnesota already has a solid environmental review process, as well as specific requirements for feedlots starting at 300 animal units or more, and additional requirements for feedlots of 1,000 animal units or more. And these requirements already include a manure management plan, public notice, emergency disaster plans, and engineered construction plans. These manure management plans, for instance, give livestock farmers the direction they need to apply manure in a responsible way that reduces any impact to groundwater and delivers a high-quality alternative to commercial fertilizer for farmers to grow their crop. In particular, if you're an organic fan, you should be very happy to have manure spread on your land. The existing permit process also contains a framework for environmental assessment worksheets to be completed. And once the feedlot completes an EAW, the MPC can evaluate and determine whether they need to have an EIS. So there's just no need for this 10,000 animal unit language in the bill. I do want to thank Chair Hansen for his work on the feral hog issue. I've shared my pictures on my phone with him and some others in the room. We are seeing feral hogs across the border now, in Kitson County in particular. I think there's more work to be done in that in Article 6, but it's a good start. And I look forward to working more on the feral hog issue with Chair Hansen. Also specific to my district is the elk management plan and changes to it. And unfortunately, those proposed changes that are on Section 38, page 66 in the bill really disregard the concerns of folks back home in my district in Northwest Minnesota. Removal of this elk management plan language essentially grants the DNR the ability to grow the elk herds, completely disregarding my farmers and ranchers in Kitson County in particular. Increasing the size of this elk population without additional compensation for the landowners and the farmers involved creates an undue financial burden for those folks. And by striking previous language, local cattle and grain farmers' voices are really, really being ignored. For reference, and I wish I had the numbers passed out to you on your desks, but Department of Ag, who handles the depredation account for wolves and elk, which transfers between each account, they've already transferred $33,000 from the wolf account to the elk account as we speak. So they're already in a situation where they're short about $90,000 to pay elk claims in Kitson County and in Marshall County, and they won't be able to pay those claims until fiscal year 25. So they're expecting to run out of money early in fiscal year 25. Northwest Minnesota County grain and cattle farmers should not bear the burden for growing the elk herd. And I want to thank Chair Vang for her assurances that this depredation issue will be corrected in our Ag Committee going forward. Beyond that, you know, I think in committee we addressed this at some degree, but if you turn to Article 7 in the bill under the miscellaneous section, there's some troubling, and this did come up in committee, and I asked Chair Anson about it. I'm not going to ask him to yield today. But if you look at sections 1, 2, and 3, in particular, sections that are all written to ag statute don't belong in this environment bill. Section 1 addresses pesticide-treated seed. It should be in 21, if I remember correctly. It's written to Section 18B in statute. Pesticide-treated treat, nitrogen inhibitors in Section 2 and Section 3, which provide definitions for systemic pesticide. All those provisions really don't belong in this bill. So with that, and with all the other problems I see in the bill that Representative Scraba already outlined, I'd ask you for a no vote. Thank you.
The member from Winona, Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Between running for county commissioner and House representatives, I've run 4 campaigns based on stopping the expansion of government. And this bill does something just exactly the opposite. It penalizes hardworking Minnesotans and discourages businesses from considering moving here. A few of the provisions in this bill include an increase in ag-related penalties raised by more than 300% from $25,000 per day to $75,000 per day. Another increase in penalties of 700% from $10,000 to $70,000. And here's my favorite. And by favorite, I mean, I can't believe this. An increase in a penalty of 4,000% from $500 to $20,000. And you might think, well, some of these industrial organizations or big companies or commercial outlets, maybe they deserve a $20,000 penalty. But this $20,000 penalty is for farmers, including small organic farmers who might only have 5 or 10 acres, and they plant 1 foot too close to a stream bed. So this is planting a crop on property they own themselves and are paying taxes on. And this might have been a mistake on their part, or stream beds move. You get a heavy rain, It washes out one side of the bank and it deposits the soil on the other side of the bank. $20,000 for it'd be like a $20,000 penalty for going 56 in a 55-mile-an-hour speed zone. And I've sat on just as many of these water resource boards as I could for the last 12 years on the county board. We've done everything we can to encourage farmers to come into the ASCS office, NCRS office, SWCD. But when they start hearing about a $20,000 penalty for a violation that one of these offices would have control over, they're not going to come in anymore. They're going to just try to be as divorced from the government as they possibly can be. Other provisions in the bill, it requires EISs on large dairies that will cost clearly hundreds of thousands of dollars and drive businesses to neighboring states. And the bill raids the taxpayers' bank accounts in what I'd consider to be unethical ways. The bill includes $1.3 million for the Lawns to Legumes program, $5.5 million to the PCA, another $3 million to the PCA for environmental justice areas, more than $1 million for a mobile emissions trailer, $1 million for lawn equipment and snow removal, making those equipment electrified, $1.3 million to the DNR for legal costs, $4 million to the DNR for tree planting, and the $3.1 million to convert corn plots into tree plantings, $12 million to the Met Council, more than $200 million for modernizing outdoor experiences. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, this bill simply pits the DNR against farmers. It pits small farmers against large farmers, and it pits neighbor against neighbor. Please vote no.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Chair Hansen for your bill. I rise today to speak for trees. I just want to thank the author for the inclusion of the tree planting funds that we have in this bill. We needed to make some up after last year. I'm excited for what we got in this bill. I'm excited for what we have in other bills. And I just wanted to take a second and just talk for a second about trees, because I love trees and I love legislating for trees. So one thing we know about trees in Minnesota is that we have the emerald ash borer, which is coming for our trees. We have 1 billion ash trees in Minnesota. I don't know if people realize that. That's billion with a B. We actually have 15 billion living trees in Minnesota. I find that just astonishing. It's very hard to scale that. Most of those ash trees, 30% of the trees in the metro area, the 7-county metro, 30% are ash trees. Our communities are losing a lot of trees, and it's a real problem. We know that trees are good for the air. They are the lungs of the planet, as was recently said to me. But I also just wanted to make sure people know the other reasons that we need to plant these trees, especially here in our urban areas and in our environmental justice areas. So in case you don't know, trees lower the temperature. They decrease anxiety. If you live in an area with tree canopy, they decrease anxiety, they decrease psychological stress, they increase attentiveness and cardiovascular function. They increase social cohesion, and they decrease crime. We also know that Black and brown communities in the United States, and this is true in Minnesota, have 33% less tree cover than white communities, and high poverty communities have 41% less tree cover than wealthy communities. So we need to plant trees. We need to plant them for every environment and climate reason that we know. But we also all benefit from trees in ways we don't even understand. And when we lack trees, we may not understand that that's part of what we're missing, but we need to make sure the benefits of trees are being equitably distributed to every Minnesotan. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Anderson. Or, I'm sorry, the representative from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, from Duluth. Anyway, I'm on the Ag Committee, and I'm really surprised at all of the issues in this environmental bill that really have a direct impact on agriculture. I could go down the list: corn planting ban on state land, increase in fees of buffer violations, mandatory EIS on large feedlots, soil health grants. Representative Burkle mentioned some of the statutes that really are ag statutes but are in this bill. I'm going to talk on one other issue in this bill that really impacts ag again, and that has to do with the tile, I call tile registry language in this bill that seems to be, again, to be another program where there's going to be a fee and another application to fill out and to go to Bowser or your SWCD. And really, I have to ask myself, is it necessary? I mean, when most people buy cropland or farmland, having tile is a positive thing. And I talked to the realtor back home in town, and he gave me this form. It's from the Minnesota Realtors Transition. It's 12 pages that has to be filled out with a whole host of questions, instructions to buyer, instructions to seller. Is this information disclosed to the best of the seller's knowledge? Any current, past, phase 1, phase 2, or 3 environmental site issues? And here we go on page 3. Is the property located in a drainage district, county, or judicial drainage system? Is the property drain tiled? It's already here, folks, in disclosure that's being filled out by buyer and seller. Is there a private drainage system on the property? Is the property located within a government designated disaster evacuation zone, nuclear facility, hazardous chemical facility, or a waste facility? Any drainage issues, flooding or conditions conducive to flooding, any settling, erosion, soil movement problems affecting the property, any gravel pits, sinkholes, caves, mine shafts, or others affecting the property. I think we have that topic pretty well covered, members. I don't think there's a need for that in state statutes. And my last comment is Chair Vang on the floor. Yes, she is. Thank you, Chair Vang. Just a quick question to you. There's a lot of things in this bill that really refer to ag policy, and Representative Burkle mentioned a couple of issues. Section 18, pesticide-treated seeds, Section 21, systemic pesticides. I think those were in the ag bill we passed out of your committee last year and were taken out in conference. So my question, would the Chair Vang yield to a question, Madam Speaker?
She will yield. Representative Anderson.
Chair Vang, just a quick question to you. Being all of these issues in this environment bill relate to ag, or a lot of the issues relate to your bill, which we're going to be hearing later today, I hear. Were you ever asked to have some of these things heard in your committee, specifically regulations about pesticide-treated seeds, systemic pesticides, or a big increase in fines on buffer zone infractions? Were you ever asked to hear some of those things in the Ag Committee? Chair Vang.
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Anderson, for your question. The issue of pesticides, currently in Representative Hansen's bill on environment, they are only definitions. Last session, we have heard related languages relating to programming, such as verification of need or pesticide regulation, and knowing how those are much more regulatory programs that they also did not make it into law, did not make it into the final conference bill, but have been issues that we've discussed for a number of years already. So they're not new issues, and we've heard them before. And so I think this year in the environments bill, with just the definitions, there are not extensive language as we've heard last year. And so I think it is a reasonable language that we can come to a consensus with this year.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Vang. I agree that they are only definitions, but sometimes they are just the building blocks, the foundation of things that will come later on down the road. So again, Madam Speaker and members, I too would voice my opposition to the bill, mainly based on some of the negative things that are going to impact agriculture. We mentioned those before, but thank you for allowing me to speak on the bill, and I would recommend a no vote as well.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks to all of my colleagues who voiced concerns with this bill. There's a lot of concerning things found within this bill, but the other thing that needs to be mentioned is what's not in this bill. Throughout the course of the last 2 years, there's been opportunities to talk about proper wildlife management of all of the species. As we've heard, the contents of this bill are actually going to have a more devastating impact upon proper wildlife management in this state. There's been an overpopulation of countless species, especially wolves. The deer population has been radically changed, and there hasn't been any conversation, any hearing, any debate in the House of Representatives about the things that impact our outdoor heritage and our hunting heritage here in Minnesota. These populations are greatly impacted by weather and climate. They're impacted by agriculture policy and especially environmental policy. And while Democrats have had the DFL trifecta here in St. Paul, there have been no hearings, no discussions, no conversation, no compromise, and no input from Minnesotans as to the wildlife populations in Minnesota. This is important because the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is inadequately hearing the voices of hunters and outdoorsmen and women across this state. The wolf management plan that came into place in 2023 didn't receive any amount of scrutiny from the House of Representatives. We haven't taken up any additional conversation or debate that is impacting the deer population throughout the vast majority of the state. Democrats, Republicans, independents, and people who don't vote care about our outdoor and hunting heritage. And yet, with inaction from this legislature, wildlife populations are out of control. We aren't seeing proper wildlife management practices happening in our state. And the negative impacts are vast and wide. Throughout large swaths of northern Minnesota, people who have hunted for generations in the North Woods are no longer seeing deer. And the reason that this is happening is because of an overpopulation of wolves, among other circumstances. But the things that are within our control in this body did not hear. And because of that, the next generation will have fewer opportunities to hunt the woods, to enjoy the outdoors, because these populations will cease to exist in key portions of the state. The wolves are so rampant across large swaths of Minnesota that the deer populations continue to be pushed further and further and further and further south. The result of this inaction and improper wildlife management is that there are long-time, generational deer hunters who this fall don't even plan to hunt. And their voice hasn't been represented here at the legislature during the complete DFL control of state government. And it's irresponsible. Now was the time for action. Now was the time to take a positive first step to managing our wildlife populations and to hold the DNR accountable, because it's their actions that have resulted in devastation for our hunting and outdoor heritage. Proper wildlife management in our state is a bipartisan issue, one that involves all of us. But the inaction of the complete DFL trifecta in Minnesota is failing Minnesotans. And it's hard to stand here today realizing that no debate and no conversation was held over proper wildlife management in Minnesota. Currently, in state law, the DNR is only directed to survey northeastern Minnesota as it relates to the wolf population. The vast majority of my district and Representative Murphy's district and countless others aren't even surveyed for the number of wolves that they have. And if we are saying today, if the DNR is saying today that the wolf population is between 2,900 and 3,000 wolves in only the northeastern part of the state, how many more wolves are impacting our wildlife populations throughout the entirety of the state? Whether in southeastern Minnesota, the far western part of Minnesota, or any other corner, including communities near the metro. The result of inaction is devastation for the future of our hunting and outdoor heritage. And we could have taken up conversations this session and during this legislature to prioritize this. And Republicans are committed to having these conversations and advancing bills and legislative priorities that get Minnesota back to responsible wildlife management. Because inaction is failure. We must restore responsible wildlife management to this state and get our state back on track.
Further discussion to the bill. The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's 2 points I would like to point out. You know, in my neck of the woods on the western part of Minnesota, we're pretty flat. You can actually see a deer 3-4 miles away. If we go a foot elevation in 1 mile, that's about it. And it's one of the richest soils out here. And because of the Red River Valley, which I represent, we help to feed the world. I mean, think about that. West Central Minnesota, we help feed the world with soybeans, corn, and wheat being the top 3 products, agriculture products made here grown here, in Minnesota. Unfortunately, this bill feels like, and I hate to use these words because they're strong words, another war on agriculture. There was a lot of things shared here today Two things that I'd like to point out that my constituents would say would be quite odd, I'll just use that word, they use other words than that, is that drain tile disclosure. Folks in my area, here's how you have to relate to it. If you bought an old home, took down all the sheetrocks, put in all new piping, all new plumbing, all new wiring, you would get a better value for that home. So if you went to sell that home, you would say, hey, potential buyers, I put in new plumbing, new piping, new electrical wires. That's exactly the same thing with drain tile. It raises the value. It actually creates clean water, which we want a better clean water because it runs down to Lake Traverse, into the Red River Valley, or the southern part of my district into Big Stone, down to Ortonville, Madam Speaker. And so forth. So that's why it's so odd, because you're going to want to disclose that, because you're going to get more per acre, you're going to get better production, better yields, which what happens? We're feeding Minnesota better. So that is just one of the odd things in this bill. Second thing is even more bizarre, in my opinion. 10 years ago, we had this conversation about buffers. And one of the things individuals continue to forget is that's taking of land. In the metro area, if we're building for a train, like the Southwest Rail, or doing a highway, we have to acquire the land. The state has to acquire that land. That never happened with buffers. Nope. The state of Minnesota said, through Bowser, you have to do it a certain way. And then there was some flexibility. Because of that wisdom and some flexibility and time, landowners, being Minnesota nice, decided, yep, we got to work with it. And we have right now 98% compliance. And generally forcing people to do something is not the best way. That's why over these last 10 years, we have reached 98% compliance with the buffer. But in this bill, this goes from $500 violation to $10,000. I'll say it again, for $500 to $10,000, that's like a 4,000% increase. That is just absurd. And what it's doing is saying government knows best. Let's continue to work. And government doesn't know best, by the way. We have a tendency, government, to screw things up. And that's why that slow approach, working with the landowners through the Soil Water Conservation District's work. Traverse County was probably one of the areas that the landowners fought the hardest against it. And over time, worked with them, and they fell into compliance. So those are just two of the reasons that we need to vote no on this. And thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to address one issue. Members received at their desk a letter from Medical Alley talking about just a very small provision in the bill, but it has big implications in my district. So as many members may know, or I honestly didn't know until a while ago, there are two types of PFAS. Some is water soluble, some is non-soluble. And so as the bill makes progress through the Senate and the Conference Committee, I would just like to ask that Chair Hansen and members of the Conference Committee take this into account when they look at those reporting requirements, because the non-soluble, water-soluble PFAS is very different from the water-soluble, and it won't be caught up in all of the water contamination issues that are generally associated publicly with PFAS, but it has nothing to do with these devices that are critical to the health of our citizens and to a lot of the businesses in my district who make these devices, these life-saving devices. So Chair Hansen, I'm just bringing that to your attention, and I ask for you to keep that in mind as the bill moves forward. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau. The member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, thank you for the discussion today. My remarks are going to be focused on Article 5 of the bill because members, Minnesota has a waste problem, and 40% of that waste comes from packaging. We could fill 10 target fields with the packaging waste that we put in landfills and incinerators in Minnesota. That's not all waste, that's just the waste from packaging. And this is going to grow as we shift to more and more of an e-commerce economy. In the metro alone, the amount of waste generated is projected to grow by 19% over the next 2 decades. And currently, we and our constituents, people, are responsible for the cost of our products and life because we pay taxes to our local governments and fees to deal with our waste. Much of what we could recycle or compost is put in a landfill or burned in incinerators. Creating new plastics and products and then transporting that waste to end markets exacerbates climate change and puts emissions into our environment. And Minnesota does have a strong foundation for recycling, but a 2024 report found that more than 65% of our cardboard, paper, bottles, cans, and other recyclables still end up in Minnesota landfills and incinerators, or as plastic pollution in our environment. Our system is overwhelmed, underperforming, outdated, and unjust. And Article 5, which started out as a bill called the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act, is the solution. We need to both generate less waste and deal with the waste that we produce more effectively. And Article 5 does both. And the conceit behind this is that the producers of waste pay, not your voters, Madam Speaker and members, who have no choice in the packaging the products they use come in. A lot of you have heard this bill and heard this story probably as it's been through committees, but I would encourage you to imagine your local grocery store, which for me is located in the Quarry in Northeast Minneapolis, and you need laundry detergent, and you have a lot of choice in the kind of laundry detergent you buy. You could get flakes, you could get liquid, you could get pods, you could get the fresh scent, you could get hypoallergenic, but you don't have a choice in what that laundry detergent comes in. It all comes in a plastic package. And so this bill, so importantly, ensures that all packaging, Madam Speaker, in Minnesota will be reusable, recyclable, and compostable by 2032. There was one misconception said about this bill that I feel I need to clean up. Representative Scraba, e-waste is not in this bill. That's a different bill. That's not part of this. So Article 5 only refers to waste associated with packaging. But members, you should be really excited to vote for this bill, not because it does reduce costs and increases recycling, but it's a good consumer bill. There are huge cost savers to your taxpayers and your local governments. Counties were a driving force behind this bill in addition to our zero waste advocates, and they're begging for this. It's not just my county and Hennepin County or Ramsey County, but recently even the Hubbard County Solid Waste Administrator wrote a letter to the editor begging for this act. We've worked with county waste administrators from across the state on this. There are investments in Minnesota manufacturing. Many of our local manufacturers are asking for these materials that start out as packaging waste to be generated and turned into materials in manufacturing. And furthermore, small businesses are actually investing in reuse. In Minneapolis, I was excited this past winter on one of our only snowy weekends to go to the Loppet, the World Cup. And I'm not much of a skier, although it was exciting to cheer on Jesse Diggins, but I do enjoy our local beer scene here in Minnesota. And I was really excited that every cup at the World Cup that you could get beer in or something else if you so chose was in a reusable cup. Not just a recyclable cup, but there is a local business in Minnesota called Our World, which supplied all of the cups for the World Cup. And so you could get your beer and you could return it and they would reuse that, which is a higher use than even recycling. So this bill incentivizes our small businesses in Minnesota who are asking for both the materials and the ability to reuse these products. This is a good bill for public health. Toxics and microplastics are accumulating in our bodies. The average American consumes a credit card worth of plastic every week. So a credit card, think about your credit card and your plastic. You are taking that into your body, in the food that you eat, in the air that you breathe, and the things you come into contact with. You are consuming that much plastic, and so are your family members. So are your loved ones, so are your children, your grandchildren, your parents. That's not right. Microplastics have been found in breast milk, blood, placenta, and other bodily fluids. Basically everywhere they look in your body, they're finding microplastics. And the National Institute of Health found links between microplastic in human bodies and liver damage, damage to human reproductive systems, and our immune responses. This legislature last year took action to define the problem of microplastics, and now we can define the solution. There are important public health benefits to our environmental justice concerns. So right now, many of these plastics are ending up in our landfills and in our trash incinerators. When they end up in our landfills, that ends up in our soil where our food is grown, and it ends up in our water that we drink. When it's burned in incinerators like the one that I live downwind from, I take that in and breathe that every day. So do my constituents, and so do Chair Lee's constituents, and so do many of your constituents who are breathing in that air. That's getting into our lungs and into our bodies. Not only is it producing microplastics in our bodies, it's also correlating with higher upper respiratory disease. We know that there is a correlation between asthma and our performance in schools. So you need to worry about this when we're thinking about what is causing kids to miss school. And often it is public health concerns such as asthma. This is also just a really good bill for the environment. One of the #1 questions I heard when this bill was in committee was around littering. We see litter everywhere we go, and a lot of it comes from plastics. I live on a busy street, and much of it is coming from all of the packaging, and much of it is plastics. It ends up in my yard, but it also ends up in the drain next to my yard. In fact, it's even clogged my drain, where the city of Minneapolis had to come out and remove plastic bags from the drain that was outside my yard after it flooded the streets. There's also an investment in recycling and in the facilities that are actually doing the recycling. Not in landfills, which are reaching the sky, like Representative Hansen said, where we have landfills that are now bigger than our ski jumps, or in incinerators that spew smoke into the air by baseball fields. And it also stops the shedding of microplastics, like I said, into our water and soil. This protects water, wildlife, and plant life. Microplastics have been found in the bodies of earthworms in the Boundary Waters Wilderness. And not in some of those lakes on the edge. This has been found in some of those lakes several portages deep. Lakes that it would take you days to be able to canoe to. But researchers from the University of Wisconsin dissected earthworms and found microplastics in them. That is how deep this problem goes, is not only is it in our bodies in northeast Minneapolis, but it's in our earthworms in northeastern Minnesota. So for many years, Minnesota was considered a leader in recycling, and we no longer are. So by passing this bill, we can be that leader again. So I urge you to vote yes.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Speaker. And thank you to all of you that have weighed in on this bill today. I think that we've had a good debate, good discussion of our, quite honestly, in most cases, shared values of clean air, clean water, improved regulatory system to make sure that we have the processes in place at MPCA and DNR to address the needs of both the people of Minnesota and that balance with nature. There's certainly a lot that has been covered by members on both sides of the aisle today. I think where we quite often have disagreements is how do we get from point A to completion? And yes, I favor a more maybe friendly approach, a little more carrot, a little less stick. And I do think that those shared values can be accomplished when we work together, and I hope that going forward in conference committee, we have that opportunity to iron out some of those details that we might not have agreement. We've covered a number of concerning subject areas in the bill, whether it was the new rules for boat wrap and how do we get those materials to a single facility. Maybe a test product or a test project would have been a better approach as opposed to a statewide rollout that we really don't know how that's going to work or not work. Some of the ag language that's in this bill, it sounds like it really didn't have the opportunity that we would have liked to see it come through the Ag Committee and have a more robust discussion there. Some of the language as it relates to trees, again, shared values. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to capture carbon and to clean the air. And trees are a critical part of not only Minnesota's economy, but also it's very important in that process of capturing carbon and clean air. The more trees we can put on the landscape, the better, and it's a renewable resource. We all agree on that. There's no disagreement there. So I'm not going to go on. A lot of this has already been covered, so I'm going to cut it short. But Representative Hansen, I want to thank you for running, I think, a very good committee, and all the staff that have been involved in getting to where we are today. Peter and Amy primarily are kind of our go-to, but there's so many others, and I'm going to miss one. That's usually how it goes. So thank you to all those that worked to make sure our bills got drafted and all of the amendments and whatever it is that we needed, materials and so on. I think we got through some challenging conversations without too much disagreement. We obviously have, like I said, a different approach, but for the most part, I feel like we had an opportunity to be heard, those of us on the minority. Sometimes it might have been a little short here and there, but we usually had an opportunity to address that later, and I appreciate that, Representative Hansen. So members, I'm going to be a no on this bill today, probably not surprisingly, but I do think it's important that the work continues, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity to do that going forward. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and we'll move on. Thank you again.
To the author of the bill, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Thank you for the discussion. You know, it is a bright day out there. Again, a good day to plant trees. We do have differences of opinion. And part of those differences of opinion are measured by experience. And I've been in this chair, literally this chair, for 20 years. I've been in the minority, I've been in the majority. I've given very similar speeches about things I didn't like. Representative Anderson, I see you're nodding your head. You may remember those. I think as Minnesotans, we're trying to do better. And what I'm trying to say here is that it's not just about providing the investments. We provided significant investments last year, and we're trying to provide additional investments this year. But we do need to change policies. We need to adapt to the changing information we receive. Why do we put definitions in there? 20 years ago, we weren't talking about neonicotinoids and treated seed. Now we're talking about them being in us, about neonicotinoids being in us. So you can't manage what you can't measure. And by putting these definitions in, that does, yes, I'll admit it, we're building a framework for the future, for future people, future members, so they can look back and say, are we putting things in? What is the definition of this? What is the framework? And that's what we're trying to do with helium. We're saying this is a huge issue. I think we had testimony that it could generate $1 million a day for someone. That's a pretty big incentive to do something, $1 million a day. So we better get it right for Minnesotans. We better get it right in terms of the resource, but we better get it right in terms of environmental protection. And so we put in a moratorium, and we're putting in that time for the agencies, and we demanded a public process. That public process, we now have the technology to zoom in and get more people involved in the decision making. And the more people that are involved in those decisions, and I'll go Representative Burkle, the feral hog issue. We had really good engagement with virtual meetings. And more people, once we asked them for their opinion, we got it. And that helped build a better product. So I know it's easy sometimes to vote no, because you can always find something in a bill that you don't like. I'm asking you to take the risk to vote yes. A vote yes that we can do better. A vote yes that this is a comprehensive yet supplemental bill. a bill that can lay the foundation, rebalance some of the investments we made last year, and have a better outcome for Minnesotans. Because that's why we're all here. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Here you go.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Howard.
Howard votes aye.
Howard, aye. Cagle.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye. Tabke.
Tabke, aye.
Tabke, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 ayes and 63 noes, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.